For my speech, I'm going to be talking about Taiwan. I think this is a pretty interesting island. And if you've ever wondered where, like, basically all of your electronics come from, all the chips inside that, what makes it run, it's going to come from Taiwan. Taiwan is located right there, kind of just off of China, below Japan, in between China, Japan, and the Philippines. Taiwan's a pretty small island compared to everything around it. So I've got a few main points I want to talk about for Taiwan. The growth and how it's managed to grow being so small in between all the world superpowers like Japan, China, even Australia down there. I want to talk about how Taiwan was able to grow, especially into the chip world, kind of, because they right now own over 50% of the manufacturing of chips. The human rights problems they have going on in Taiwan, and employment and economic growth, and how they're able to kind of go through, especially now with COVID and all the supply chain issues, and inflation and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give you guys some information on the country of Taiwan. Starting off with some background information, Taiwan has some wars and conflicts in their past. As we know, Taiwan is controlled kind of by like China, but not actually. So China considers them to be under their control, but they're actually independent. So in 1895, the Japanese were under control. They seized control of Taiwan, and then at the end of World War II, when Japan surrendered, after they got two very large bombs dropped on them, the Republic of China took over in Taiwan, and then in the middle of the 20th century, when the China Communist Party pushed the Republic of China out, they moved everybody to Taiwan, and they took over Taiwan. So Taiwan is still like China controlled, but it's a separate. It used to be the Republic of China, but when they got kicked out by the Communist Party, that's kind of where they moved. The ethnic breakdown of Taiwan is 95% Chinese, so you can kind of tell it's not really as much indigenous people. It's 2.3% indigenous people, so it's not really their home anymore. They kind of take it over. Taiwan is only 14,000 square miles, a little bit under that actually, and under 24 million people. So if you look at Taiwan and see how small it is, it's actually quite a significant amount of people on such a small island, considering they don't really have that much space. When you look at like China, I mean they've got like a billion, but it's still quite a bit. Moving on to my next point, I've got the manufacturing superpower. They have two major big businesses that control the semiconductor and the electronic industry. They have Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and the United Microelectronics Corporation. These two companies are both located in Taiwan, and they ship their semiconductors all around the world. They control over 50% of the world semiconductor production as of 2020 when we were going into COVID. Semiconductors are going to be in your phones, your laptops, your game consoles, even your fridges, microwaves, anything like that. Even your medical equipment in your hospitals nowadays. And that's kind of became more important going into COVID. They play a little bit of a big role in politics because they do control such a big market share, and China kind of trying to take control of Taiwan. If they were able to like seize it completely, they would be able to hold off the entire world from semiconductors. So that's why partially a reason the United States is trying to keep Taiwan away from China and keep them independent, just because they control so much of that share, and it would limit the United States. And that's kind of the problem with Taiwan and why they struggle like with being controlled by so many other countries, because they're so important to like the industry and the age we're moving into with electronics and all that. Every big country wants to control it because obviously that gives them an advantage over the supply chain, moving into like the technology era. Moving on, I want to talk about Taiwan and human rights. I pulled this information from the Department of State, so this was a report that the Department of State did, our government, over Taiwan. So Taiwan is officially a democracy. They vote just like we do almost, like popular vote. So they are elected by the people. They have a parliament, so it's more like the United Kingdom, but kind of similar to us. So everybody they have in the government is elected by people with different parties. The laws are enforced by the National Police, Agency of Corrections, and the Coast Guard Administration. So they have almost like our version of like the FBI and the prison system, as well as like the Coast Guard or the National Guard. To the knowledge of the Department of State, there's no unlawful acts Like, I guess that would be, an example of that would be like Iran, their problem with like homosexual people and all that fun jazz. The police force works very similar to the United States, and they have fair trials, so they get, the judge system works pretty much the same. There is a little bit of like coercion there, so like they kind of enforce a little bit of what they want, depending on how they are pushed. So I guess you could consider that a little bit leaning in a certain way. They also have a constitution. It grants all citizens freedom of speech and expression, including members of the press. So they kind of have like the same thing that we have in the United States. They can't be arrested for speaking, and especially for the press, it's pretty important. So they can't get arrested for reporting on like certain things. The government does struggle to enforce this at sometimes. So like if it were to kind of harm the government, they're more likely to not enforce the fact that all their citizens get freedom of speech. So there have been some reports that they like arrest people that don't talk about them very nicely. The People's Republic of China, which is the government of Taiwan, has been reported to influence national news outlets in favor of the leading businesses. So that basically means like it's harder for a small business to start up in Taiwan because the government and the news outlets are so focused on the big businesses that are already there. It's kind of trying to keep it all in the couple businesses that are already pretty big, but it's harder for small businesses to start up. They have the freedom of peaceful assembly, so they're allowed to gather and protest and stuff like that, just like we are, as long as it's not harmful. They have a female president, and 42% of legislators are women. So the majority, almost the majority, is pretty split for their government. So I mean, they have pretty equal representation. And the reproductive rights of women are protected, and they have access to emergency contraceptives at hospital and all that fun jazz. So they don't have to worry about that. They have child laws. Men can legally get married at 18. Women can legally get married at 16. Age of consent is 16. You can start working in Taiwan at 15, and the minimum wage is $5.24 an hour. That's converted to US dollars. So it's a little bit different there. A US dollar converts to about 30 Taiwan dollars. So it's a little bit different, but it's priced roughly the same. Moving on to employment and economic growth for Taiwan. This is from Britannica.com, so this is where I pulled this stuff. It's about economy and economic growth, and also the Taiwan's official website for the government. They post their economic stuff for labor statistics. Taiwan has an unemployment rate of 3.64%. It's the lowest in the last few years, besides COVID. Their annual GDP growth is growing over 3% year over year over the past 5 years. And their government debt is 30% of their GDP right now. They are currently $200 billion in debt, which compared to us, we're like over $20 trillion in debt. They're doing pretty okay. Just something to consider. And basically, the thing I learned about Taiwan here is Taiwan is almost basically a mirror image of the United States, or that's what they seem to be, but they sometimes struggle. They don't have as much outside pressure to remain as rock solid as our government, so it's harder for them to get exposed to corruption and things like that. So really, as long as they were to like stay true to their principles, the Constitution and everything like holds them in the ground. The government is pretty good and well designed, but some of the problems they deal with is just because the government doesn't really get punished when they don't enforce their laws correctly, so they can get away with kind of using it to their advantage when that is to benefit them and the economy and things like that. Right now, moving forward, there's a couple Taiwan businesses looking to move out of Taiwan just because they're in such of a bad position. Like if Taiwan were to get taken over by, say, China, which is kind of a problem with the escalating in the world. They're trying to move out just because free trade usually benefits a company, and if China were to take over, that's kind of something that they're worried is going to get taken over. So they're trying to move out. Taiwan Semiconductor Company is currently building 2 semiconductor plants in Arizona for roughly $80 billion. Yeah, that is all I got for Taiwan.